Thank you all for joining. We will get started here very shortly with the virtual session of Bike Summit for Rochester, Minnesota, hosted by We Bike Rochester and only made possible by the sponsors you see here on our screen, on your screens. These are folks who've all made commitments to support bicycling advocacy, education, and ridership in Rochester. So if you haven't visited some of these places, you haven't been there recently to dine, to buy product, services, whatever it might be, just know that these are the folks that really care about bicycling in the area and support you as someone who is interested in bicycling. And I think it's safe to make that assumption that you're joining this virtual session because you're interested in hearing more about bicycling in Rochester.
We'll do a little announcing first and give some people some time to join us. My name is Carrie Ospey. I am one of the board members for We Bike Rochester. Today, welcome to our second day of Bike Summit for Thursday, September 9th. A few housekeeping things as we go through is we wanted to let you know that please feel free if you have questions during the presentation to go ahead and put them in chat and we'll monitor them and ask. We're going to also leave some time at the end, about 10 to 15 minutes for a question period. So if you want to hold them to the end too, that's great. We also want to thank our sponsors for hosting or for supporting the Bike Summit. Like it says on the slide, our support goes beyond Bike Summit for education, advocacy, and ride programming. And we thank everyone for their support. Special thanks today too for our speaker sponsors, Bicycle Sports and Forager Brewery. And then don't forget the group ride and gathering tonight, 6 p.m. at Taco Dead. We will have $5 gift cards to Taco Dead, which is good for food or drink for the first 50 summit attendees and group ride participants. All right, so I guess without further ado, I'm just really excited. I'd really like to introduce you today and welcome our speaker today, Abdullahi Abdulle. Abdullahi is a Somali American immigrant, a veteran of the Minnesota Army National Guard, council member for the city of New Brighton, Minnesota, and transportation equity planning coordinator in MnDOT's Office of Transportation System Management. He joined MnDOT in the spring of 2021 to lead the agency's advancing transportation equity initiatives. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Construction Management and Master of Arts in Urban Planning from Minnesota State University in Mankato. Prior to joining MnDOT, Abdullahi worked for the city of Minneapolis, where he led the planning, programming, and delivery of capital projects with a special focus on authentic relational community engagement, equity implications, and incorporating community needs into decision-making processes. Welcome, Abdullahi.
Thanks so much, Carrie. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. It's great to be here with all of you.
Good, great. I really appreciate all the things we've been able to share about you, but I would like you, if you could, to tell us a little bit more about yourself and kind of what led to your interest in urban planning, public service, and equity and justice.
Thank you very much. Again, it's really great to be here with you all, to be in community with you all, and for you all to think I have something meaningful to share, which I do think I have, but it's also good other people are interested in hearing my story. And especially in Rochester, which I don't really spend a lot of time in, but I have been fortunate to visit a couple of times in the city. I have some distant relatives there, so maybe about a month ago I was there. So a little bit about myself. As you said, my name is Abdullahi Abdulle. I'm a Somali American immigrant. And I have been living in the country for over 11 years now. I came here just solo as the only one of my family to this country. I had an interesting background and even like upbringing and childhood where for some reason, I'm not even sure what inspired, but I found myself very independent even at age 13 or so, where for the first time I traveled alone from my hometown, which is in central Somalia, a place where there weren't a lot of opportunities, a lot of resources, especially educational opportunities beyond the typical Quranic seminaries that are very common in Somalia. So I traveled to Mogadishu, a big city of over 2 million people, where I started attending school. I had an interest, and nobody was pushing at the time, but I had an interest to just learn more. Education just kept me it got me excited or excited about what I can learn, what the new things, like figuring out no math problem, up to a point where math was actually my favorite subject at the time. I don't know where I lost. I think somewhere beyond calculus and derivative equation, like differential equations, is where I probably lost interest in math, or math being my favorite subject. Anyway, so that was my background. I spent all through high school in Mogadishu, and then I traveled again out of Somalia because there was not really a lot of opportunities to Kenya, where I spent some time, and then to Pakistan, where I studied college a little bit, and then I resettled for the first time as the only one of my family in the U.S. and in Hopkins, Minnesota, for a little while, and then I attended Minnesota State University in Mankato. The main reason, I love that school, it's my alma mater, but the main reason that I chose Mankato was really the tuition affordability. I looked at the University of Minnesota, it was very expensive, and without really getting financial help from anyone else, I knew I couldn't afford that. It was also for similar reasons, and also maybe a little bit more leadership and personal skills development, that I decided to join the National Guard just the same time that I was, like, my first semester of undergraduate education in Mankato, because I figured, well, I will be here studying like school and spending my time here, and part-time gig with the National Guard felt like something I could do. And it all worked out very well, which I'm very happy that I was able to graduate with both undergraduate and graduate degrees without any debt. And I'm very grateful for that, because I'm not really advocating for everyone to just, that is the option. If you want to take care of your tuition, just go join the army. That is not as easy for everybody, and I know that. But at least in my case, it worked out. And so my undergraduate was construction management. It's kind of like a long story. I started from civil engineering interest, and then I found my way into construction management. But then when I graduated with that degree, the field of construction management did not really connect with me or resonate with me as much as I would have hoped. I always wanted to be involved with some type of community work, something that is a little bit more than a paycheck. So I was at this stage where I felt like, well, I have a degree, but how does this work? I don't really want to work in this field. What else can I do without throwing away everything that I've learned? So I found urban planning. So I set up a conversation with the chair of urban planning program there, and she talked about how she worked in the public sector, and now she was leading a educational program there, and it was exciting. So that is how I found my way into urban planning. The rest is just I'll get into some of the little bit of pieces of the stories of like what led to my interest in even running for public office later on. But that is how I got my way into urban planning. Maybe some initial red flags that I could share from urban planning graduate school was just how the program was very Western education centric. Like, we did not learn anything about any city building work that has been happening outside of the Western Hemisphere, and that was something that I was surprised with, even though majority of my classmates were even international students, including, I was a US citizen back then, or naturalized citizen, but just the curriculums were different. And now it's even more clear to me these days, because I do equity work, that like why that is the case. Urban planning is in a way colorblind, if that is a word that I can use. And all things are just kind of like faced from an angle of things will work for everybody, but it's not really that easy. So that is a little bit of a story, maybe background story, but that is how I found my way into urban planning and how I started my early days here and we settled to the US.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting about the work with the urban planning and that it was so focused on the Western cities and not looking at anything in really other large cities that have very vibrant and urban things.
Yeah, or that have think about ancient civilizations and where they existed, and none of that was ever mentioned. I mean, it was not maybe critical for the course development or anything. It's just a little bit of critique here for urban planning for those of us that are still maybe going to schools. We could criticize that, I think, and it was just interesting to me. But then I guess it makes sense if you're just in the West and you're only focused on I'm only doing my education here, and that is the worldview that I have, but it doesn't work for everybody.
Right. Can you help us understand kind of some of the blind spots in urban planning? Like, what might be an example of that?
Oh, there are plenty. But I love that question because, well, think about doing community engagement, for example. It is a standard process for all urban planning, like whether you are doing land use or transportation planning or bicycle and pedestrian programming or projects programming or something else like policy development. You still have to do touch base with your community. But now think about the times that we hold these meetings. It's often, what time is it? 5 p.m. maybe, 6 p.m. when people that traditionally work in the traditional normal hours, 9 to 5 jobs can attend, because we're assuming people have regular, normal, typical job that they go to start 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. in the morning and leave and come home around 5, 6 p.m. And now they can attend meetings. Or now during when things are in Zoom, everybody has internet connections and they can attend our meetings. That is really not the case. There are folks, it wasn't the case for me either. Right? My first job, when I came here, at the time I didn't have my undergraduate degrees or the graduate program. I didn't have all the privileges that I have now. So the only jobs that I could get were one was a call center where I only lasted 3 months and then they let me go because I couldn't keep up with the calls. And another one was where I had to work in a target distribution center and I had to start, very early in the morning and work 10 hours. And it was very far from where I lived. So it was a couple of hours in between, on commute, if I wanted to take the public transportation. Otherwise I had to just find some relative or a distant friend's friend that can take me there. So now there is a large portion that's already disadvantaged from your communities that might not be able to attend in your regularly scheduled meetings, and as the norm is for example, urban planning meetings, public meetings, for example. So that is one blind spot, but there are many. This could be true for the day that you are holding the meeting. So many people know that there are religious holidays, even in this month, right? For Jewish community members, Muslim community members have their own important religious holidays that sometimes even follow the lunar calendar. So it's not easy to track for you. You can't just mark that day off and say every year on September 15th, there's this holiday. It just follows the lunar calendar, so it depends when the moon is sighted, and it changes from year to year. It moves around. But if you held your meeting that day, everybody else, at least from that group or community demographics, will be out and about, having fun with their families and friends, and they will not be attending your meetings. And now you are wondering, why is this happening to me? Or why are people not interested in my project? So there are plenty of them, and I think just a way to think about resolving those is just be a little bit mindful about who your community is. And it's always helpful, even if this is not the case or applicable to you, to ask yourself, why am I holding this meeting and who is able to attend? And what do I want people to get out of it? And sometimes even ask yourself, who is not able to attend, right? It's better to ask with that question, start with that question, and then you will figure out. Because for the folks that can already attend, there's no problem, they will be there. But the folks that cannot attend the meeting, but you still want to make sure you get their input, those are the ones that you really need to focus on and spend more time. Hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of what some blind spots could look like.
Right. So with some of those examples, I know when you worked with the city of Minneapolis, you were focused on a lot of the community active transportation initiatives. What did you find successful in the ability to conduct community engagement, that you felt comfortable, that you found you were reaching a lot of people, or did you find you weren't reaching who you wanted to reach?
So that is also another tough one. The standard practice also did not really work for me, and I felt like it didn't work for communities. And that is not, I mean, I'm not really advocating for not to hold like all these like community meetings. Yes, we still need to do, but the tools that we're using and the process that we're using, for example, go into all the neighborhood organizations. I don't know if you have neighborhood organizations in Rochester. We did in Minneapolis. Neighborhood organizations were staffed by folks that have time, right? And typically did not really look like the community demographics in the neighborhood that they were located. So there was always like a huge subset of the population that you could just see are not represented in these conversations. So the biggest challenge for me is like, how do we reach the folks that are not really here? And then I figure out a way to do that, but that would require us to change the way that we do business, including being able to not have an agenda item and just go and showing up to the community and having conversation with people and listening to them. This could mean you have a 10-year plan, transportation plan or housing plan or roadway improvement plan or bicycle master plan that you want to talk to people about. But people would probably, like, on the other hand, they also have their like agenda items. They have their own list of things that are important to them. That could include just improving the sidewalk in front of their home. It includes like winter maintenance. It includes what to do about crime at night, or what to do about like lack of street lighting in their neighborhoods. It could include about things like people are smoking in my drive, like in my backyard or something like that, and it's creating health problems for my kids, or I don't feel safe in my neighborhood. It's challenging for our urban planner to address those. I do understand that, because like, well, you're not public safety or you're not the housing department. You're not, but what is important is just humanizing and acknowledging the human stories that are coming from people. And this is important for us to hear, because if we are really sincerely listening to people and acknowledging their problems and their issues and things that are important to them, they will trust us. And trust is very important in at least government work, because like before you even get to the point where you can get meaningful feedback from people need to be able to trust you, instead of just another government official or staffer that is out there to just get some information and then disappear for 2 years and then come back with another information request. So that kind of illuminates into some of the like ongoing challenges. That is what I meant, relational community building, community engagement. It is what some people call more authentic and organic community engagement. That is important, but it's very tough, because planning by nature is very like, everything is planned out. You have like what you know what you want to do in the next 50 years, and you want to figure out how everything turns out, but life does not really work like that. So I think it's okay to sometimes slow down and see what people are interested. What you have might work in some communities, but it might not work in other communities. So like it will be very difficult to just build something that follows like a standard, like more streamlined version or process.
It's hard to do that. Yeah, I can totally see that, because on one hand, you've got this project, right, that you're going out because you want to do it and you want to get feedback, but you want to do that project. But it may turn out that really isn't what's best or what's wanted. And yeah, have you ever had that experience when you've brought on some of the active transportation projects you've worked on? that it's really come back with the feedback that it wouldn't be a good idea to go forward with it, or it would need a major replan based on the community feedback?
Yes, not for me necessarily, but I have seen some, right? There were some like engagement efforts that resulted in projects being canceled or pushed out. I did have projects that were like not stalled, but were pushed out at least a year out to make room for more, excuse me for a second, to make room for people's input and to incorporate what we were hearing from people. It can be very difficult, but that is okay, right? It makes things a little bit tricky. It will require us to think deeply about what we really want to do, because at the end of the day, yes, I mean, there is a lot of value in the people that are designing these projects, the engineers, the planners, and everyone else. But the community also has a lot of knowledge, right? They know the local context, they know what will work for them, and really what they need to have access to efficient and more a transportation system and options that will fulfill their daily needs. I am aware of at least one sample project that, because they were using publication or project process, that the community decided to just cancel the whole the street. I'm not sure if it was middle overlay or complete street reconstruction, but the project was canceled. Minneapolis didn't have that. People, and that is another thing. Like, what do people, when we do community engagement, typically we're not very transparent about the power people hold. Like, can people actually veto or reject their project, or are we there? So there are like different levels of community participation, right? From informing to consulting with communities to co-creating vision and goals with communities. And typically in the government realm, it's more about like just informing people what is happening, and might be taking a little bit of feedback from community, so it changes, it influenced the final implementation. But if it's us in a way where we are co-creating a vision and a goal of a project, then that work needs to start like realistically years and years in advance. So by the time that people are doing long-range planning, is probably the best time that communities can come up with their own like dream versions of projects that they want. And that, like, some communities like Seattle are doing that. They have participatory like transportation program, I believe is what they call it, where the communities are basically coming up with the projects that they want in their neighborhoods, and the city funds those projects. I mean, that is also another thing very new that I'm not aware is happening in this state, but it could.
Mm-hmm. And then Matt has a question he'd like to ask. He's raising his hand.
Hey there. I'm hearing how important it is for communities to organize and share their input or insight into how that community moves throughout the physical space we all reside. And as an advocacy group, as We Bike Rochester, we feel we represent part of the bicycle community in Rochester, but we are working towards gathering more diverse perspectives. And it's something that we're continuously improving upon, and know that is something that we want to, that is a priority for our group. So when you describe like gathering the input, how can we as an advocacy group be a stronger representation of a holistic community, not just a sliver of it?
That is a really great question. And I think it just goes back to what I was talking about relationships. And yes, first of all, kind of walk into that, like, I think, or maybe even before that, it's really important that you have that strong commitment to broaden like your membership. So it's included, like it includes communities that are typically might be represented at least for the city, in bike pedestrian advocacy or bicycle advocacy circles. So that commitment is important because like there are groups that are not really like think, yeah, I have a mission to do and I will just focus on that, right? So if you have that commitment, then the next step, at least the way I see it, and I'm not saying this is the only right way to do it, the next step that I see is just like building that relationship with community members, like reaching out to folks that typically would not necessarily be in this space, because there might be some, and sometimes you will be surprised, like you will get natural allies. You see people that just like love biking or cycling, and would be interested to even like work with you and be an advocate of this work in their own communities, sometimes communities that speak non-English language. And that would be of huge importance in the way I see it. The challenge that you'll probably face though is just people always have these competing priorities, and like everyone will like, they will think, is this the right thing for me to do? It's not easy. Like the environmental benefits are clear to people that do this work. And it's all important to us that yes, mode shift is an important, and more people should be biking and walking and taking transit instead of single occupants vehicles or driving alone to work if they can. But that is not really clear to a lot of people. Especially like people that their like lived experiences dictate that what for them to actually make a living, they just need to have a personal vehicle. That was initially my experience before I started my urban planning journey. Because it was very challenging to make a living, actually. Just imagine going to or commuting to 20 miles, like 15 miles or so, or double of that, like each way, right? 30 miles per day for a work where you cannot be even late for a couple of minutes. You just have to like clock in time, otherwise you're gone. Biking and all the active transportation systems options are not really good options there. That is one thing to be aware of and be mindful of. But the other thing to be aware of is just like some people don't have the resources and the knowledge and the information that we have access to as people that work in the built environment. So it would just some baby steps. Just start with the commitment which you already have, and then reach out to folks and see what allies you can build. Is there times in the week where you can spend time with community members, or even like kind of like show up to some other spaces where people are gathering and just have conversations with people and share what you do? Because yes, you're right. Like for advocacy groups, especially, it's important that like you have broader support and participation.
Thank you. And kind of talking about that too, that accepted for active transportation, that it's so many different things, right? It's making sure that you have the ability to get on a bus at different hours, and that it's not necessarily rapid, but convenient, and you can rely on it, when it's coming, and it comes often enough that if you miss it, you're not stuck waiting an hour in the dark somewhere. But it's too that you see probably it's employers accepting active transportation, and that being willing to let people be 2, 3, 5 minutes late when something happens.
Yes, that is extremely important. And hopefully that is something that advocacy groups can help with, right? Like how to change that like perception about what is viable commute option and what is not, right? Mm-hmm. Most of your developments, and as a council member, I do see that those come along, a lot of big developments coming along. And one main thing that no one is always missing, or one main thing that no one is missing, like it's always there, is parking. Like every development would have like ample parking. You will know how many parking spaces per unit. You will know how many parking spots per floor ratio, like all the everything. How you compare that with other like comparable developments, nobody typically talks about, like, I haven't seen people talking about the same way about like bike in parks or like bike racks, as though that is not a viable transportation option. I mean, sidewalks show up, but it's not talked about as though sidewalks are also mean like another infrastructure, transportation infrastructure. So are bike racks or bicycle parking. So that perception, and I think the point that you made about like employers accepting, especially in the public sector and nonprofit, accepting people to be a little bit late if they commute by bike or if they walk to work, having people that like as long as they work their 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours, whatever they're supposed to work in, it should be okay. Like people shouldn't be like forced to clock in at a specific like time like that. In a way that feels like we are treating people like machines, not really as humans. And that's a little bit concerning.
Right. And then I have another question, and maybe this can speak to part of your work with the Council in New Brighton as well, but also can you talk about working with school districts when doing future planning for transportation? Our school district has kids that could walk and bike because they live within 1.5 miles of their school, but often intersections or, the infrastructure is not there. So then people drive and it turns into a huge line at school.
So not in my, 1 second again, I'm sorry. So that was, I will start with this. That was my last project in the city of Minneapolis, or one of the last projects I was working on in Minneapolis was Safe Routes to School project, which was really important. And there was the similar issue that you just shared. Many students lived very close, within a mile of their school, in very, like in an area that is highly residential, high density residential areas. But students were needed to cross the streets that were carrying over like 7,000-8,000 vehicles per day. So very busy streets. Some of those were one-way streets, and they did not have there are some intersections because of the location to the school. They're the most direct route, walking route for people, and those were the least safe. But there were, for example, signals and things like that in places that are far away, and that typically don't work for people, even though it kind of creates an excuse for agencies to say, well, we have an infrastructure, a block to the east, block to the west, block to the south or north, and there's no need to like do these additional improvements here. It was very challenging project because, and not because it didn't make sense. It made a lot of sense. It had a state grant that won because the need was visibly there. But at the same time, there was just a lot of challenges internally to design that, because like how do I say this more politely? I think we got used to designing the streets a certain way that retrofits projects that make the streets safer are not always supported by everyone in governments, even right. Before you get into the school board. The school board is another issue. So I think this is where the strong voices from the community talking to like their elected officials and their people that serve them will be clearly important. Like if I get emails every single day that this is not safe, every email that I get will be also forwarded to the city administrator, city manager that I have, and this would be something that will take a lot of their time until we fix it, right? But it would be difficult if it's just like if it falls on advocacy groups or even students themselves. So that is where we need a little bit more help coming from communities asking for that push, and advocacy groups I think is great. As far as in my own area, this is only our first year. It is completely different situation. It's very different than Minneapolis. Minneapolis, majority of streets have sidewalks. In New Brighton, majority of the streets don't have sidewalks. So for kids to walk to school, they just have to like share the road with cars. You would hope cars would be slow, but sometimes they are not. Even if they are 30 miles per hour, that is still dangerous. And it's one of the things that I've been pushing for, and I will still keep pushing for, is to meaningfully think about how to make our streets both slower and narrower at the same time. We do street reconstruction projects, and every year we do about 2 miles of street reconstruction. And at the same time, if you think about narrowing the streets, it's just an idea that because I'm the only city planner transportation background and the only maybe like my other colleagues will have to come along, and I'll have to have a lot of conversations with people about the need for this, because people don't really see the need for that until they are in a situation where they feel like their kids not safe in the street, and then they will think about like a smaller like one-off solutions like speed bumps. I want to think about more holistic solutions for our street system so that they are safer. Right now we have a development in our community, and it's big about a building of 132 units, and many people are contacting us about an increased traffic in their neighborhood or in their area, knowing that, and our data is telling us it's only about 700 cars a day on those streets. But at the same time, they think they will have like busier streets, and it will be like they are advocating for speed bumps and things like that. The same situation, most of our streets carry higher, if not less, but maybe higher traffic than these streets. And people will only advocate for these issues when it's in their own backyard. I think what I would like to work on is just that holistic like improvement of our built environment, especially streets that don't have, and it's not just sidewalks, because you don't have sidewalks, now you don't have ADA ones too in your corners, which is like for your person that is rolling or in a wheelchair, they just also have to share the road. And that is very unsafe. And this is, I'm not sure about Rochester, but it's the situation where many suburban communities find themselves in.
I think that's too. And unfortunately, in the past 2 weeks since school has started, we have had someone hit because they had to cross a 4-lane, I believe they go 45 miles an hour on that section to get to the neighborhood. So there's active discussions now, talking about that. But I think the solution is like 2 years out that they're talking about doing it. So it's hard.
Yeah, 4-lane undivided roads are the most dangerous streets that you can have. So I hope some solutions comes to that street that is very dangerous.
Right. So after having those conversations, do you have any tips for getting community members together? And are there places you found that are the best places to hold meetings in the community that you feel you get a good response, or people feel safe going to those places and be speaking? During pandemic or outside of pandemic? It depends. It depends. And the question is, do you have tips? What's tips for getting community members together, and where in community would the meetings be held? Mm-hmm. If you would suggest your suggestion.
My suggestion, and something that we are actually doing in the MnDOT, and I was also advocating for in Minneapolis, is to actually not hold your own meetings. And I don't know who already does this, but instead of like holding your own meetings and trying to invite people and bringing people along and go through all those like logistical challenges, and still people will not show up, is for you to find where people are already gathering, where people are already having standing meetings. For community-based organizations, this could look like board meetings. For cultural communities, it could look like just some national or religious holidays. It could look like something different too, right? But learning about what that looks like, and then asking for permission to show up to those spaces, I think is good. Unless it's even better if you have somebody that you're working with that has intimate and more in-depth knowledge about these different cultural and these different meetings and how they are run. That way, you are showing up to space. I mean, first you're asking for permission, but at the same time, you are in community with people, and you're not. I think some people are a little bit kind of hesitant because you feel like you're invading people's like holy spaces or more sacred spaces. But if you are invited, that is okay. And also people will feel a little bit more at ease. The way I at least personally experience and think of, people feel more at ease and feel like they are more empowered and have a little bit more power because now they are in their own space. And instead, if they come to a government building or another public building, they feel like they could be kicked out, and what they say doesn't really matter that much. So, but it's also important for me to say, when I say this, it's important for me to say to also honor people's time and like contributions and the things that people are trying to do, like especially time, right? Mm-hmm. So if there is, dependent, especially for governments, nonprofits are always kind of like in a tricky situation with funding, but for governments where we spend a lot of money on the standard transportation or other planning things like traffic studies, and nobody asks questions about. But when we say we need to compensate people for their time and give them $50 gift card, it becomes this huge discussion that nobody will support. So I think that is another very important point. Yes, it's important to show up to people when people are already gathering, but you should honor and also compensate people for their time to the extent that's possible.
For sure. You mentioned a little bit about MnDOT and Transportation Equity Planning Coordinator. So congratulations on that job. I know you moved to that earlier this year. And would you like to talk about the position or what you see as the vision for that coordinator position and your goals?
Yes. Well, so my biggest, I think, task is just to have conversations with people about transportation equity. This is new role that didn't exist before I stepped into the role. My manager used to do this work as many other things like leading the statewide multimodal plan. So it's new role. It is, MnDOT already had internally looking equity team, diversity, equity, and inclusion office that looks at equity and inclusion related to employees and their empowerment and feeling safe in their work and fulfilled. But this is more about the system externally as it relates to delivering equitable services to people in Minnesota across the state. So that is the role I'm stepping into. And I'm very fortunate to do this work in a time where there's just a lot of community momentum to do that work. But that said, it's not really easy job. First, because there isn't a template that I can follow for somebody that was doing the job before me. But I am grounded not just my own values, but also my in-depth community understanding and educational and work experience that I had and the connections that I'm grateful to have built in the past. And my current involvement with some national initiatives that like the NACTO fellowship that I participated. But as far as goals are related, it comes down to one, building capacity for MnDOT staff across all different levels, whether they are designers or engineers or project managers or planners. So everyone understands that they have a role in advancing transportation equity and also understand a little bit to know what that role looks like. In that regard, I am leading a research project where we are bringing local and national experts to develop transportation equity training for us. So we could deliver that training to MnDOT staff across all different levels in state and regions and districts. And that's very essential. I'm also have been leading some conversations about just stepping back and trying to define what transportation equity even looks like. So we're defining transportation equity. We worked with, and this was not just on staff, we consulted with community advisory group that we call Equity Working Group that comes together every month and talk to us about an hour, for 2 hours actually, to give us feedback about the different policies that we would like to include in our 5-year update of the statewide multimodal transportation plan, which we do every 5 years. We did one in 2017, we're doing another one now. So this equity work group helped us craft some language that we could use to be a transportation equity definition. Because if you don't have, even though we have been having conversations about transportation equity in the last 4 years or so, there haven't been a consensus on what that looks like. Is it, what are we talking about? Modal equity or geographic equity? Or are we talking about more ability-based and income-based equity? Or are we talking about something else? So we're defining that, and we're fortunate to be finalizing that and revising it. By early next year, we'll have a definition that will be part of, like, it will ground all the other decisions that we make around transportation equity. It will be short enough that people can understand, short enough, but also precise and clear enough for people to know what transportation equity is. There is a whole sort of other things that I'm leading, but those are some of the main things. Another essential thing that were kind of sort of showing up in my conversations already is what we are calling community conversations. We are holding, and some community members actually call it equity interviews. This is where we go to each MnDOT district of those 8 or 9 different MnDOT districts and hold interviews with community-based organizations that serve their own communities and know the most about their own community members. And then they tell us about what is the need in Mankato or in Rochester or in Wilmer. And then we're working with the district planners and district engineers and the staff to take that information and develop a sort of like issues, recommendations, and then implementation plan for that work. That is how it started. We're calling this a grass tops level because it wasn't feasible to have that conversation at the ground level with individual community members to get a broader understanding of the need that exists across the state. We just had to have that conversation with community-based organizations, while also empowering these community-based organizations to serve the communities that they already serve and also compensate them for their own time. There are other things that are also happening, but those are some notable things that we're doing. Just the final one that I will share is we're also like not just doing work in MnDOT and state level, but we're coordinating and collaborating with other states and also the U.S. Department of Transportation, Federal Highway Administration. We're putting together a peer exchange now on transportation equity, and that will be coming out. That will be conducted hopefully next year. But the application is submitted, and I'm working with them on that as well.
That's really great. And then you kind of mentioned too earlier that your work with the NACDO Transportation Justice, that you were a fellow this year for 2021, and congratulations on that too.
Thank you.
And yeah, and so would you want to talk about that too, and how you've got all these levels you're working with the local and the state, and then the U.S. Department of Transportation, and then you get to work with fellow planners and people in the Justice Fellowship. How has that been going for you, and have you been able to bring things back already to inform your work in Minnesota?
So it does really inform my work in a way, even if it's not like something more like pronounced and written. It grounds me in the way that I think about transportation and justice, and mobility. What that fellowship is about is many thanks to Dr. Destiny Thomas. I don't know who in here knows about Destiny Thomas. She's just a great national leader on transportation, justice, and mobility, and also dignity. Had a conversation and vision for a world where there are more folks from Black, Indigenous, and people of color background that are in positions of authority and power in governments for changes to happen, because often people that have substantial influence and huge powers do not really have the lived experiences of the communities that they serve, and that is a huge gap that typically exacerbates some of the disparities that continue to exist. Transportation inequities are not only historic things, they are still happening today, but they might be a bit unclear to the people that don't have those lived experiences. So yes, and shared the article for Dr. Thomas. So that has been great. This is the first time. And then NACTO and Better Bike Share program and the city of Philadelphia came together to fund the first year of this fellowship. It is new. It's the first time that we're doing this. So there's a lot of things and a lot of lessons learned that are going. But it is great space for us to come together from all across the country, from the East Coast, West Coast, and South and North and Midwest. And there are people all the way from New York and Bay Area, and like Los Angeles, as well as Texas, and myself here. And everyone is almost in their like first 7-8 years of work, like transportation, mobility, justice, and even now some nonprofit leadership roles. So to come together and have the conversations about how to make this world a little bit better and network together and exchange ideas has been very meaningful and fulfilling for me. It's still going. We're working on a couple of projects, and I'm thinking about some things that I want to bring back and even make like some presentations about to my colleagues at MnDOT. But that work is still going. So far, it has been very fulfilling though.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for posting the article about Dr. Thomas. And I think it's the Thrivent Project too.
Yes, that's her organization or her company that she started.
Yeah, I would really recommend that too. I've been on that website. It's really great. We did have a question that, if time permits, could you comment on what projects have had or might have the highest impact on helping solve transportation inequity? This is very likely community specific, but we'd be interested in some examples if you have one that sticks out.
I think I would recommend, and if you look it up, you'll find it. I would recommend the Rethinking I-94 work, and also the Livability Initiative work that my colleague from MnDOT, Gloria Jeff, is leading. As some of you already know, Rondo neighborhood in St. Paul has been an example of what extreme version of transportation injustice could look like, where because of the development of I-94, a thriving Black neighborhood was completely destroyed and cut off by the highway development or highway construction. It's estimated that about 600 homes were lost and about 300 businesses that were also destroyed in its wake. And the community was opposed to the construction of the highway then, not just now. And since then, they've also been advocating for reconnecting that neighborhood. Reconnecting Rondo is a project, and also like thinking about how to address that historic injustice that happened to that community. It's surprising that I cannot think about a lot of projects, but I'm sure they are there. some positive projects are there. Any intentionally planned project that's not like leave people behind is really great example that way. I'm only sharing these ones because they have like some huge and substantial legacy in history.
Right, and I think recently there's been some good presentations and online things about the Rethink 94 too, that yes, hopefully I'll try and share out on the WeBike social.
Yes, please.
So that people can read those about them. I know we're getting toward the end of time. Is there anything you would like to leave us with at the end of the presentation today to really think about for the future as we work on active transportation or equity, advancing equity issues in our community or across the state?
I'm in solidarity with you, and I admire what you're doing, even if I'm not in space with you all the time. So my parting words are words of affinity and affirmation of the work that you're all doing. It is, and sometimes it's okay that each of us have our own little focus areas, because collectively then we are more whole and more complete. Bicycle advocacy, even though I'm not in that space, I know folks like you are doing the work that we need to do and influence change in a more meaningful way. So keep doing what you're doing, and just like always think about people whenever you discuss anything. People, what does it mean for people? And then furthermore, what does it mean for individual community members? Like that you can have a name. What does that mean for people? That humanizes the process every time that we not talk about systems and users, but we talk about people with names and specific neighborhoods. There is better outcome for those people. But when we generalize things and make about numbers and quantities and infrastructure and users, we lose the basic element of this, which is the people. So that is my that's my closing. And I really appreciate this being in this space with you all. This is amazing. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much. We all really appreciate your time today. I know that there's a big transportation conference you said is going on this week. So we really thank you for your time that you took for us to be able to share all that. And I really hope that we can stay in touch, that, you know, that we are a group that can work with you and the transportation initiatives, not only in our community, but across the state. I've learned so much today and really, really appreciate your work and the knowledge you shared with us.
Likewise, and I'm very sorry that I have not been spending a lot of time on the chat. I see a lot of great discussion going on here. I'm so sorry if I didn't directly respond to this to the chat. But this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, I hope I hit most of the conversation, the questions. There were a lot. We have some really great, I guess, some resources that have been shared too, for planning and knowledge, and a huge push that we hope that you'll find ways, and if we can help to get your research out so it's discoverable, because the more talking and the more sharing we can do with everybody is so important. And the hour did go fast. I was like, I know we could probably fill another I know, another hour with everything. Yeah. So, you know, we want to thank you. And anytime you want to ride down to Rochester, let us know.
Absolutely.
And yeah. And so on that, just thank you everyone for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. We look forward to seeing everyone that can come at 6 p.m. tonight at Taco Jed for our group ride and social hour. And then just a plug in for next week is our third installment of the Rochester Bike Summit. It'll be Tuesday, September 14th, and it's an update on the Rochester Active Transportation Plan. And it's being presented by Colin Harris from Alta Planning and Design and the City of Rochester Community Development and Public Works. And that evening's group ride is 6 p.m. again and at Old Aid Coffee Company. So we hope everyone can join us for that. Again, we thank all of our sponsors that have helped make these events possible. And really, Abdullahi, I really, really thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, you too. Bye.
Bye.